rhetoric are now bringing out the debate from different points of view. As many things in academia, a lot of times, particularly my undergraduate students, point to me, why is it that everything starts with Greece? You know, every time say something in the beginning was a Greek philosopher, a Greek something. So when we think of rhetoric, of course, we all know it's all attributed to the Greek philosophers, to Aristotle and all that. And some have challenged the Afrocentric have said, no, they didn't get it, they got it from the Egyptian civilization, just like the other forms of knowledge. Be the debate as it may, we can agree that rhetoric is something that's part of the human condition, that as soon as people communicate, they develop ways of understanding things, develop styles of communicating, and that has connections with many of the things they do. In the African setting, we now know how rhetoric doesn't have to mean in the Greek or Roman sense of somebody up in the public square making a speech, but it could be different ways of communicating. The griots were one example that show that rhetoric is the way the rhetorician, I don't know how to say it correct, but the person who is engaged in rhetoric possesses it and wants to convey it. And like we said earlier, it's connected to the culture, it's connected to the creativity, and it's done in different forms. We'll go over some of the traditional definitions of rhetoric, but in the African sense, it has to combine music, storytelling, rituals, and then so we see it in its larger context now, and I'm building this towards the core of the argument. So griots perform rituals, entertain, educate. They have responsibilities to fulfill a variety of roles as genealogists, historians, spokespersons, diplomats, musicians, teachers. But these are the building blocks of how we can understand rhetoric in its larger context. And the African rhetorical theory, among those I'm sure you run into in your research, is its emphasis on communal discourse, deliberation, action. Its ideas, as our first presenters spoke of, Cabral, formed on the crucible of struggle. It's the art of resistance. It's not just about African people, but about also humanity. It's universal aspect also. It's a reaffirmation of African peoples as well as those who are not considered fully human. So it also restores the humanity and the possibility of what's possible, what can be done. So out of this flows the African American rhetoric, which is partly a heritage of its African descent and partly the global heritage. And this refers to the study of culturally and discursively developed knowledge forms, communicative practices, and persuasive strategies rooted in freedom struggles by people of African ancestry in America. This is the rendition of it in the African American sense. Now, we will go to the need for universities to be places. This is now where we go to the idea of HBCUs, the idea of the engaged university, where universities will be places where minds are emancipated and citizens enabled to live fully conscious lives, which suggested inevitably across the question. This is one version. But there's been a critique of the traditional university system, where the emphasis has been on building new knowledge, innovative thinking, but only within the context of instrumentality, existing trade, commercial, economic paradigms, and this excludes other elements of the mission. So, by public engagement, it's now meant to include civic involvement, collaborative research, citizen science, knowledge, participatory arts, lifelong learning, community engagement, and engagement with parties. In addition, the engaged universities engage in social transformation through partnership learning, widening, participation, corporate social responsibility. Community-based participatory research is one element. In the engaged institution, the student is connected with the faculty research to leverage for research capacities, expertise, networks, with the aim of not only finding things, but having valuable outcomes in terms of its impact on society. That's why graduate students are usually directed to valuable research that would make a difference in the community, in the world. Now, the HBCU's role as leadership comes in here, where it's based on the foundation of ethics that has a sense of purpose, a sense of engaging and improving the lives of others. Programs encourage students to reflect on what and if they wish to change. Mentoring other students also to that end. Now we go to the traditional, many of you would say, the elementary definitions of rhetoric, combining the three rhetorical triangles: ethos, pathos, and logos. This, in the Greek sense, is reflected in real life in other rhetorics in the African world or in the African American case, with the ethos being a basis for honesty, that the basis for having high ideals for society, having credibility, having, it's not enough that they say something, but that they mean what they say. I teach research theory and research in African studies. And one of the things I try to tell them when they come up with their research methods is how they have definitions, their words. And I don't remember the singers or the title of the song, but I remember years ago they had in a rock and roll song where the singer would say what you mean what you say. That's what ethos would say. Say it, but also mean it, live it, because a devil quoting the scripture wouldn't have as much value if it's just for the sake of saying. And the pathos, the emotion part, that emotion is valuable, that the passion for truth, the passion for change, that's also, and the logos, reasonable, based on reality, based on facts. But then comes this important variable in looking at this, and that's the rhetorical situation. The rhetorical situation is understanding the rhetorical, which is understanding the context of that situation. The elements consist: the communicator, the issue at hand, the purpose, and the medium, and the audience. This is what, to me, is the essence of my presentation today. Because, like we're talking about, the person living in an island would have no meaning in philosophy, in aesthetics. The rhetoric in the abstract, in the vacuum, would have no meaning. It's in a rhetorical situation. And that's how, also, we need to view it as not just the product of one person, the skill of one genius. Again, when I did science and technology, I mentioned to my students how inventions were portrayed as a work of one smart person. I asked them their view, what their view of a scientist would be: a white man with a white coat in a secluded place. But that excludes the thousands of people who built the foundation for that scientist to develop, from the language they developed, from the discovery of women, minorities, Smiths, working people, their innovations. It's out of this that the genius brings. That's part where that might make a difference. So rhetoric is also like that, because it is the work of thousands of people, their culture, their knowledge, their honoring of truth, that lays the basis for it. And when you speak of rhetoric in the African world, obviously it has to tap into their experiences, their grievances, their hopes, their achievements. So we judge this, and when we judge the achievements of the HBCUs, this is where we find where they made a difference in bringing out the best of what could be found in humanity and addressing problems. So in public engagement, we see how these ideas that are brought from the works of people are communicated and brought to life. And this is why you'll see HBCUs were centrally in public discourse, in labor, as you can see, on strike, how HBCUs, and their networks, their combinations of stakeholders made a difference, as you can see in the, and we'll go in greater detail how HBCUs played a big role in the world later on in fight against racism, against anti-Semitism, poverty in the world, exclusion. And I'll try to touch on their relations to events. When I was talking about the rhetorical situation, rhetorics have importance in the context of their events. This is a quote from Langston Hughes. He goes, "Look here, America, what have you done? Let things drift until the riots come. You tell me that Hitler is a mighty bad man. I guess he took lessons from the Ku Klux Klan. I ask you this question because I want to know how long I got to fight both Hitler and Jim Crow." This is a rhetoric that addressed the issues of the day when fascism was rising. By the way, if you want to know the role of HBCUs, long before racism, anti-Semitism was big, in the 30s, in the 20s, HBCUs like Howard and others were at the forefront of addressing racism, pointing to as evil when many, and when there were big demonstrations here even in the 1930s. I had a lot of images, so I sometimes make the mistake of putting too much and I couldn't bring it here. But this huge, this huge rally in New York City on Nazism. This was the time when HBCUs were mentioning this and they connected racism at home with global racism. And you see elements how the context of, as you can see, Jan Lewis and others. But the models of higher education in this case become where mainstream institutions of higher learning had this ivory tower model, this insulated model, this engaged model. Many of the universities like Harvard didn't raise these issues. In fact, many thought emotion was wrong, that there should be detached ways of looking at things. And the HBCUs, of course, they had vested interest in doing this, but because of their position, they understood the connections. They viewed the world of pursuit of knowledge divorced from the larger society concerns of justice, equity, and sustainable human security as wrong if it is divorced. HBCUs, as a result, engage education in its context with global transformation through the rhetorics of social change embedded in their curriculum, practice, and the university. As the focal point of knowledge by I know I have to make time for next speakers. This is one context that I like to show, where you have in Selma, and you see the first you have blue, yellow, but where the rhetorics are embedded in the societies. Over you see the two images, the writer and the activist there, who played a big role in addressing social justice, and many same in where they show this. So HBCUs become agents of change, and you can see rather many of the names of as always in I'm telling in 3 minutes. Let me just so I show how their role, the students, the movements, the civil rights movements, were key in bringing this. How leaders, public leaders, unions, civic leaders came in. You see the movement there. You see in Howard, Logan, and so we get to the point where the rhetorics of HBCUs understood, and they weren't local. They weren't just even. Interestingly enough, Howard accepted women from the beginning. When Harvard and all that, they say that this was in the mid 65 at the time, but at least they were open in their enrollments. They didn't limit by race or ethnicity, and they took global issues just as much as local issues. One good example, Du Bois exposed unwavering belief in the indivisibility of national and international human rights. King, in his platform, spoke against apartheid, South Africa, global poverty, the war in Vietnam. Malcolm X, Banch, Lloyd Burns, Ida Wills, they used their platforms to address international human rights. So human rights was connected with money. Here is quickly, I was gonna, this was the motto of many of the leaders, and this is picked by the African History Month. Life is most persistent and urgent. The question is, what are you doing for others? I smiled and see some of teenagers on their t-shirts saying, what have you done for me today? You know, but that's the converse, that's the reverse of what the idea of rhetoric in the service of humanity, in the service of others meant. And I'll run over this, but part of the movement that was run, and this was the Black Arts movement, which emphasized pride and dignity, along with the Harlem Renaissance. I'll run, and here's one image where you see fascists, they rose against not only fascist Germany, but many volunteered against the fascism in Spain. So you had fights to racism, and this is one interesting thing. When Hitler's war was ended, and many of the universities wouldn't allow this outstanding Jewish scholars, they found a home in HBCUs. And it was the blessing of both, because they made a big difference I don't have time to go to many of the people they produced. But this is what the idea of rhetoric and HBCUs, and then the idea of an engaged institution means in transforming society and the world. Thank you.
So I was asked to make a quick announcement for introducing the next speaker. If you go to this website, www.afrored.org, you can download the program for today for yourself. I'm sorry, but I was told to inform you that if you go to the website, you will find the program for today and follow along.
Do you mind just repeating? I'm sorry, I can't see what.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I would like to just type it.
Yes, www.afrhet.org.
Okay. Thank you.
So next we have Dr. Makasi, Decolonizing the Imaginaries, Epistemology and Rhetoric in African Diaspora Studies.
morning, everybody.
Good morning.
My name is Clément Cassi. I'm from the Department of World Language and Culture. Like you see, the title is Decolonizing the Marginalized Epistemology and Rhetoric in African and African Diaspora Studies. I don't want to talk about the rhetoric as the classics, because for me, all human groups are entitled to develop their own rhetoric. So for me, it's not a debate. That's why the word decolonization is very important for me, because it comes to deconstruct some kind of concept that have been naturalized in the sense like they became natural, so natural like we forgot to deconstruct them and we perpetuate them too. Let's take one example to begin. Is it curious for me, like any time you try to find a definition of rhetoric, they send you to the Greek society. Anytime you try to define the word classics, they send you to the Greek or Roman culture. Anytime you're trying to find the definition of Renaissance, they take you to the same pattern, the same route. So it's time now to decolonize this imaginary. But let's go step by step. Number one, since we talk about African and African diaspora, let's talk about it. Remember I began saying we use the words that became so natural, like we perpetuate them. But what is African and African diaspora? If you place yourself from the perspective of, and you can go to this. If you place yourself on the perspective of African American, for instance, and I want to stop again. Excuse me if I stop, because the decolonization is a long route. I want to stop there about African American and to say this is another naturalized concept we accept. America is a continent, so we should work about African US citizen. First step. Let's say we, in quotation mark, we say African American. From the perspective of the African American, African diaspora will be those of the African descent will be out of African American society. If you put yourself from the perspective of the African diaspora will be all those who have been either enslaved or deported or disseminated for several reasons, among them the displacement or the migration in another part other than Africa. So at this point, it's very important for me to suggest the following concept, because if we put ourselves in both sides, we see that there are kind of hegemony of monopole of concept. So I'm proposing the post-colonial African subject. But let me be clear about the post-colonial African subject, or the African subject. Let's go with the African subject. African subject, not, first of all, subject in my articulation means simply the appropriation of the discourse. The subject is not the object like it was at the time of the enslavement and the time of colonization. It's the own appropriation of the discourse that is using. It's not talk, it's talking. So this African subject is the African subject that goes from Africa to Europe to the Americas, America again as a continent, or whereas they could have been. They are the common denominator are number one, enslavement, number two, colonization, and number three, displacement. Displacement including here migration. That said, we can understand, for instance, anytime we call the concept of African American in quotation mark, I insist on that, anytime we say Barack Obama is African American, or we say Martin Luther King is African American, we are convocating in our discourse two historical references. Number one, the number one reference in the case of Martin Luther King is the African subject linked to the enslavement, and in the case of Obama is the African subject linked to the migration. But both are the same African subject. So this is the first concept to decolonize in the process of reappropriation of the discourse. Now, what we understand by the post-colonial theory are very important for me here also to point out, and I will take my distance quickly about those who maybe assume like the post-colonial is temporal. If the post-colonial does not have anything to do with time, it's not something that happened after the colonization, no. The post-colonial is an ideological concept. The discourse, the gesture, the orality, all the fight that African subjects consubstantially, like, or parallelly, had against the predominant discourse. Example, I want to give you an example. Before I get to Achille Mbembe, that is one of the most important in African genealogy of a post-colonial theory, is like, for instance, when you talk about the people who have been colonized or enslaved, if you take the case of America as a continent, I insist on that, in the history book, they will trace the time of the discourse of black, or the time of the fight for freedom, of the time of contribution, of the construction of a nation after the so-called independence. But no. There were the Maroons in Brazil. It was called Zumbi dos Palmares. There were Maroons in Colombia, called Bencos Biojo. There were a Maroon in Mexico, called Gaspar Yanga. There were a fighter of freedom in Haiti, Dury Bookman. So all those people participate in the post-colonial, in the sense like at the same time that the practice of domination or the discourse of domination is in place, there is a counter gesture or a counter epistemology or a counter practice against that. And this a counter practice is what I call the post-colonial theory. Now I'm getting here about Achille Mbembe. Achille Mbembe is one of the greatest African thinker on the post-colonial theory. Is on the genealogy, he claimed himself to have affiliation with Frantz Fanon, and we all know the great books of Frantz Fanon. One book that he wrote, I recommend that book though. It has been translated in English, just as in French because I read originally in French. Is Critique de la raison nègre, is critics of a black reason. On this book, his principal thesis is simple. Is